Dear students, today we are going to discuss another important subject in pediatric. It is the topic of prolonged diarrhea, which is labeled as either chronic or persistent diarrhea in different conditions. I am Professor Akmal Laik from the Pediatric Department at Dr. Said Medical College. Let's review the objectives of today's talk. We feel that you should be able to understand various types of prolonged diarrhea, which are differently labeled as persistent in some cases and chronic in some cases. And how do we differentiate these two types? We also need to understand what is the underlying mechanism for this prolonged diarrhea, underlying causes, risk factors, and the pathophysiology of this important clinical entity. We also need to understand the clinical approach on the bedside and how do we investigate these cases to make a firm diagnosis. Next would be, we should be very well familiar with the various principles of treatment. How do we treat them? Either specific treatment or the general treatment. And then there are certain important conditions which need to be learned by all of you. Right. We start our discussion by reading a case history of a typical patient that came to our department some time back. It is a case history of a 2-year-old child came to us, and the mother said that my child is having prolonged diarrhea. It was recurrent and prolonged since 6 months of age. The baby was passing watery loose motions, 5 to 6 per day, not bloody, foul smelling. They would last for 2 to 3 weeks, would respond to treatment partially, and then would again recur. However, the mother said that patient has been quite well during the first 6 months when he was breastfed, and then he was immediately put on fresh milk feeding and routine family diet that the family was taking, and patients started having repeated diarrheal episodes. The parents have been consulting many doctors within their easy reach. Number of medical slips were shown. They had number of medical visits for the same problem. Some doctors linked his diarrhea to change in the milk feeding, which means that since the child had stopped mother feeding, was put on the fresh milk, cow's milk, so they changed to the formula milk feeding, but no relief. Then some physician had advised him to change it to a lactose-free milk with just partial relief, but again diarrhea recurred. Another physician thought that why not try a soya milk formula, which is called Isomil. Due to bitter taste, patient would frequently vomit, and again there was no relief. For the last 3 months, patient is getting goat milk, considering that it is very light, easily digestible, and would give relief to the patient, but again, little benefit came from goat milk. So they have been tried multiple milks and multiple food, but no relief. Doctors have prescribed multiple antibiotics to this child. Multiple antibiotics have been given to this child, and there are a number of prescription, all sort of antibiotic, like third generation cephalosporin, like quinolones, like amoxicillin, like Flagyl and different brands of Flagyl. He has received ORS for dehydration. He has received zinc syrups for diarrhea. Received number of probiotics that they may be beneficial but not much. They have received IV fluids at 1 or 2 places along with injectable antibiotic, but not much relief. Now this is the photograph of that patient. It shows very clearly that patient has developed wasting and stunting. This is based on the patient's height and weight all falling below the 5th percentile, below true standard deviation. The patient looked quite pale. He had got an abdomen looking distended. It was soft. She had perineal rashes, and they were finding of rickets in the form of rickety rosary, widened epiphyses, and he had angular stomatitis, red mucosa of the oral cavity and angular stomatitis. The investigation done showed a low hemoglobin of 8 gram per deciliter, the normal total and differential counts, but the patient had evidence of microcytosis and hypochromia. The stool examination was quite normal, with no ova, no cyst, no red blood cell, no pus cell, and the X-ray of the wrist showed changes of rickets. So that was, in a nutshell, the brief clinical presentation and the initial workup. So the question that one need to answer in this case are, first, how to proceed further now? What further conditions need to be considered in this child? And what further investigations are required in this patient to make a diagnosis? And third, in the light of investigations and the diagnosis, what treatment should be given to this patient to overcome his diarrhea and stunting and wasting and other problems? We'll discuss the case, try to answer these questions at the end of my lecture. So we define 2 terms. These are all defined by WHO, that prolonged diarrhea extending beyond 14 days from the day of onset is called persistent diarrhea if it has abrupt onset and the diarrhea starts with infective etiology, but then infection does not resolve in that 2 weeks' time and then continues to have diarrhea. This entity is labeled as persistent diarrhea, and we will discuss it in a moment. The first thing is that in certain situations, diarrhea induced by various organisms like Shigella, like Salmonella, like Enteropathic E. coli, like C. difficile, it may not resolve in that time period, and it tends to continue beyond 2 weeks' time. So prolonged GIT infection in selected cases end up as persistent diarrhea. Patients who are malnourished, who have got a very poor mucosal immunity, they are not able to overcome infection in this short period of time, and they may have persistent diarrhea. In certain cases, first infection, say rotavirus infection, causes damage to the small gut intestinal villi. There is damage to the very delicate brush border. On the brush border is the enzyme for lactose absorption called lactase. So in the post-infective stage, there is lactase deficiency and there is persistent diarrhea because lactose is not absorbed in this state. And patient frequently has acidic, watery stools and a perianal rash as a result of lactose malabsorption. Then, in certain situations, if patients are getting fresh cow's milk in an attack of diarrhea, they may develop cow's milk protein intolerance. In some situation, after infection, the normally sterile gut gets invaded by bacteria. So there is small gut bacterial overgrowth with altered bacterial flora of the gut, and that causes diarrhea. And in some situation, the physicians and the patient themselves are responsible for excessive overuse of antibiotic and when they're not indicated, leading to condition of pseudomembranous colitis and persistent diarrhea. Now it is harmful. Why? It is very harmful because if the diarrhea persists, prolongs, then there is loss of essential nutrients from the gut and patient develops malnutrition. This ends up with growth failure, and in the malnourished baby there is always element of secondary infection of the gut in future. So again, more infection, more diarrhea, more malnutrition, and ends up is ultimately earlier death of these affected individuals. So persistent diarrhea is harmful because it leads to a state of undernutrition. So how do we manage that? First thing is you continue with the breastfeeding. There should be no break. And secondly, if the patient has diarrhea, the amount of fluid loss must be replaced by ORS. ORS is essential for deficit therapy and essential for replacement of ongoing losses. We teach the parents that look, this patient is 10 kilogram, so with every loose stool he is losing around 100 ml fluid in the stool. That is 10 ml per kg per stool. So you continue to give the child 3 ounces of ORS once he passes a loose stool. If you replace it, the patient will not develop dehydration. Now these children should receive undiluted cow's milk in slightly less amount, that is something like 50 to 60 ml per kg per day. 6 to 7 feeds per day should be the optimum amount. So we try to aim for a high caloric intake of around 110 calories per kilo per day in a patient age group between 0 to 2 years of age. Good caloric intake despite diarrhea. and that is possible only once you give these children rice cereals, yogurt, dalia, lentil or khichdi with dal and banana. These things are usually given with the help of a spoon and a cup, freshly prepared and given 3-4 times a day. That will complete the caloric intake per day. We preferably use a low lactose milk. A low lactose milk can be achieved by using yogurt or by adding yogurt in the fresh cow's milk feeding. Lactose is definitely reduced once the milk is replaced by yogurt, or we can replace milk with a low lactose milk or lactose free milk, which are all freely available. But that makes it very expensive treatment. Some people would prefer using soya protein formulas. Now, soya is not animal protein, it's a vegetable protein, and the milk of that seeds is then prepared as a soya protein formula, which is helpful in both lactose intolerance as well as if we suspect cow's milk protein allergy after diarrhea. But it may be very expensive. And some children would benefit from very different formula which are called casein hydrolysate formulas, in which casein has been broken down into very small polypeptides replaced by amino acid and the polypeptide. This is called elemental formula or hydrolyzed formula in certain situations. It contains glucose polymers, it contains amino acid, it contains medium chain triglycerides, and these can be absorbed without much help from the intestinal enzymes. Now, these patients also require certain supportive treatment like zinc sulfate. We usually give it as 10 to 20 milligram per day. We have learned previously that zinc is very important regarding the repair of the gut mucosa, which has been damaged by diarrheal pathogen, and also to enhance the local gut immunity. These patients require multivitamins, all multivitamins like vitamin A, B, C, D, folic acid, but their dose should be double of the RDA. They also require minerals like calcium, phosphate, magnesium, and once infection is controlled, they need iron as well. They need a high-class animal protein, even in small amount, like small amount of minced meat and egg. Probiotics sometimes are helpful. They normalize the gut flora, but their role is doubtful and not yet settled. Gradually, the patients pass less and less stool. There is gradual improvement, and the patients start having adequate growth. However, we continue this nutritional therapy for at least 2 to 3 months so that complete catch-up has been obtained. Now we come to the second category of prolonged diarrhea, and the WHO would define it as chronic diarrhea lasting more than 14 days but having gradual insidious onset and having non-infective origin. The basic problem in this condition is some underlying cause of malabsorption of nutrients from the gut. So there is a disturbance of either digestion or absorption in the intestine, but not much role of infection in these conditions. This is called chronic diarrhea. Now, how does it start? Chronic diarrhea has different etiologies. Risk factor, which tends to cause prolonged diarrhea. Say, patient having milk protein allergy, patient having toddler's diarrhea. Some children are in habit of taking too much sugar-containing beverages, too much sorbitol, too much glucose, too much sucrose, so they develop diarrhea. You stop them and the diarrhea settles down. Some children have low-grade infection as giardiasis and amoebiasis. Patient having gluten enteropathy like celiac disease. Patient having pancreatic insufficiency like cystic fibrosis. Patient having genetic enzyme deficiencies like deficiency of fructose enzyme, galactose enzyme, lactase enzyme. All of them are in the small gut, and there can be genetic cause of their deficiency with persistent diarrhea. Zinc deficiency is a cause of diarrhea. Drugs which stimulate the gut may cause diarrhea, and patients who have undergone gut surgery in which a large part of the gut has been resected ultimately end up as short bowel syndrome with intestinal transit and then diarrhea. There are patients like who have inflammatory bowel diseases. They develop chronic diarrhea, like ulcerative colitis, like Crohn's disease, they develop it. Patients having tuberculosis, gradual onset insidious diarrhea, which continues and continues unless you think about this important endemic entity. Patients having immune deficiency have diarrhea as a very important feature. Patient having pancreatic deficiency like cystic fibrosis, patient with chronic liver disorder, chronic pancreatic disorders, they all get persistent diarrhea, they all get chronic diarrhea. Patient having certain drugs like laxative, antacids, antibiotics, they all cause diarrhea. And in the tropical view is a condition specially localized to the developing country like ours. So what is our clinical approach? First, we make a differentiating point like, is it diarrhea? Is it chronic diarrhea? Or is it persistent diarrhea? When the patient starts having diarrhea, age of onset, the type of stools, are they watery, are they bloody, mucoidy, consistency, the grading of stool, do we have blood or mucus in the stool, do we having fatty stool, which are oily, sticky, difficult to clean, and we call it as steatorrhea. Mother can sometimes note that diarrhea started after a certain change was made in the diet of the patient, like mother feeding to formula feeding, wheat, addition of wheat at around after 6 months of life, and addition of sugar like sucrose, and the diarrhea starts after adding sugar. Patient's feeding habit of taking either too much beverages, too much sugar solutions, that may end up as persistent and chronic diarrhea. Patient having allergies of the gut or food intolerance or having glossitis or acute respiratory infection if they are present. Drugs taken by the patient during diarrheal episode, if there is a family history of diarrhea or a sibling with the same problem, we may think of certain genetic disorders. And history of gut surgery in the past is again important. We examine these children and we note the growth parameters, height, weight, mid-upper arm circumference to know the degree of dehydration and the degree of undernutrition, which are very basic to begin with. We also look for signs of micronutrient deficiency like anemia, iron deficiency, rickets, vitamin D deficiency, chelosis, angular stomatitis, vitamin B deficiency, edema due to kwashiorkor and PCM, leukonychia, white nails, perianal rash, and the bully, zinc deficiency, presence of oral rash, bully, thrush, glossitis indicating B vitamin B deficiency. Children may have abdominal distension, ascites, or marked hepatic and the liver enlargement, which is unusual in these cases. All these are important clues to make a diagnosis of chronic diarrhea. Now we investigate these children. If you investigate, you might find a very common association of anemia, either microcytic hypochromic because of iron deficiency anemia, or macrocytic due to folic acid or B12 deficiency anemia, or sometimes you get a mixed picture. If the acute phase reactant like ESR and CRP are markedly raised, this points towards underlying infection or inflammation, say Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. We go for plasma protein levels like low albumin levels, globulin level, Ag ratio is disturbed, low calcium phosphate level, raised alkaline phosphatase level because of vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D is fat soluble. So with malnutrition, frequently there is malabsorption. Deranged liver function test because patients having chronic liver disease, they also get persistent diarrhea and prolonged diarrhea. Stool examination is very important and basic. We check for the presence of blood, the pH showing acidic stools, presence of reducing sugars because of lactose malabsorption, presence of fat globule indicating steatorrhea and ciliary disease, presence of ova and cyst indicating giardiasis and amoebiasis. Hence, stool examination, not once but multiple occasions, is very important under expert hands. It gives a lot of clues to make a diagnosis. And sometimes we go for 3-day fat collection for the total fecal fat losses. Investigation also includes Mantoux test to rule out tuberculosis, abdominal ultrasound for any fluid or visceromegaly, chest X-ray for pneumonia or primary complex, condition like anti-tissue transglutaminase, IgG, IgA, which are basically tests to check for the gluten enteropathy, antibody against them, anti-endomysial antibodies, CT abdomen, MRI for presence of lymph nodes, fluid, and the pancreatic anatomy and functioning. Sometimes we resort to the endoscopy and taking samples from the small gut, jejunum, ileum, to know the condition of mucosa may help in making a diagnosis of celiac disease. And sometimes we go for colonoscopy and then check for the mucosal biopsy and the gross finding suggestive of ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. And where available, we may go for antibodies against cow's milk proteins. Now, after making a diagnosis, we need to go for the supportive management, which means we have to correct fluid and electrolyte deficits. In these cases, we have to correct vitamin deficiencies. We have to correct mineral deficiencies, which are very common in these children. We have to give them albumin, salt-free albumin, IV, if the patient has got marked hypoalbuminemia and edema. we have to make a diet chart and start doing rehabilitation for the nutrient losses. We have to calculate the calories requirement for this individual, what diet changes are required. You need to give them frequent feed, NG feed, along with supplements, and sometimes, very rarely, we go for total parenteral nutrition, in which all IV is to be used for giving various nutrients like glucose, amino acid, and fats. The specific treatment is based on the underlying specific cause. Say, zinc supplements are required if the patient has evidence of zinc deficiency disorder like acrodermatitis enteropathica. Probiotics are used for changed gut flora. This includes lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. If there is lactase deficiency post-diarrheal, we resort to lactose-free milk for 2 to 4 weeks, and then condition resolves, then we can switch to the original full lactose milk. In situation in which there is severe malnutrition, we may resort toward hydrolyzed formulas. We may go toward gluten-free diet for patient with celiac disease, and if the patient has got intolerance, we may use a galactase-free milk formulas. Soya protein formula, again, one option if you think about the cow's milk protein allergy. As a simple, locally available diet for nutritional disorder on a prolonged way, we recommend a KYB diet. K stands for khichdi with rice and lentil. Y stands for yogurt, which is fermented milk and gives a very low lactose, low to the gut, and B for banana, which is high fiber and high potassium diet. So these three can be given either singly or in various combination for these patients, and it really works very well. The patient is given this diet 3-4 times a day, and it works in many ways. Now this picture shows you typical of patient of acrodermatitis enteropathica, in which there is macular vesicobullous lesions along the mucocutaneous junction on the region of face and the bottom. This condition resolves very well to the replacement of zinc. The lesions heal and the patient needs lifelong replacement with zinc. Please remember that chronic diarrhea and the persistent diarrhea remain a disease of malnutrition and undernutrition. It is both ways. This tells you what are the different phases, presentations of these patients. In the first top slide, you see patient having severe degree of wasting, all bone and skin with no fat, no muscle mass, thin limb extremity, all bony acid with loss of hair. In the second photograph on the right side, you see a patient with knee deformities as a result of advanced rickets. He has developed bony deformities. Then the patient in the lower bottom shows a whitish, foamy white patch in the region of bulbar conjunctiva. This is nothing but the bited pad, a telltale sign of vitamin A deficiency. All of them are seen in patients with chronic diarrhea, can be seen. Now we another common disease with chronic diarrhea, and that is celiac disease. So disease is basically a genetic disorder in children and adults. It is usually manifesting in children, but sometimes the condition present quite late. We see patient adolescent who who have not been diagnosed in the young age. Primarily, it basically a reaction, an autoimmune reaction to the food protein called gluten, because the body attacks itself on the basis of autoimmune phenomena. So, with the help of mediator cells, there is damage to the villi of the small gut. So the villi are blunted, they become short. Ultimately, the intestine loses the ability to absorb nutrients and patient become very sick. Now this condition has got no cure or no medication. All what you have to do is a food modification in which gluten is excluded from the diet completely, lifelong, and the patient's symptoms and signs, they improve and the disease regresses. Very old disease, but very well known to all of us. I mentioned that there are three basic things to require for the disease to manifest. There are environmental triggers. That is, there are certain grains which contain gliadin, secalin, hordein. They're all present in the grains like wheat and barley and oats. Next is the genetic predisposition. Not everyone would react to it. It is individuals who have got a specifically predisposed, they have got a specific HLA haplotype, and there are certain HLA types which are known as DQ2 and DQ8. Individuals having these HLA haplotype are genetically predisposed, and then they would mount a immune response against celiac, against gluten intolerance. And of course, a very important role of the immune system, autoimmune phenomena, ultimately ending up as damage and loss of the mucosal border, mucosal barrier in the small gut. This ends up as malnutrition, malabsorption, and patient has all the features. Here's a histopathology of small gut. You first see the normal gut. You have in the small gut, in the jejunum, typically you have got tall villi, you have got shallow crypts, invaginations, and normal thickness of the columnar epithelium ready for absorption of nutrients. You compare this gut microscopy with the next one, a sample taken from a patient with a celiac disease. What you observe that there is flattening or blunting of the villi. They are no more tall, they are very short in height, truncated, and the crypts which are becoming quite long, there is crypt hyperplasia, long crypts are seen. And third, you find lot of lymphocytic infiltration of the lamina propria in the mucosa. So these three changes are quite typical of patients with celiac disease, but they are not specific. Many other conditions have the same finding. Celiac disease has certain clinical feature limiting to gut and certain feature which are outside the gut. Now patient having GIT symptom like diarrhea, abdominal distension, recurrent vomiting, weight loss, they are not thriving, their height and weight is definitely below the normal, they may develop rectal prolapse, ulceration in the mouth, or intussusception, and sometimes older children have no diarrhea at all. They just are not thriving, short height, short weight, and they are constipated. Now, the symptoms of celiac disease can be outside the gut, which are again very important. First, most of them have developed anemia, which is iron deficiency anemia. You give them iron, it doesn't help. If you give them gluten-free diet along with iron, it helps. They develop rickets, very common because of the vitamin D deficiency, and they develop osteoporosis because of the vitamin D and calcium malabsorption. They ultimately have short stature. They ultimately develop certain skin disease lesions, vesicular eruption, as dermatitis herpetiformis or alopecia. They're very irritable. You stop you stop gluten in their diet, and they become very playful with a dramatic improvement. Now this condition is showing dermatitis herpetiformis, vesicular pink colored lesions on the abdomen, itching, and basically autoimmune in origin. So once you treat them with gluten-free diet, they also resolve. How do we diagnose this condition? We have only 4 main areas to work up. First thing are the symptoms that we just mentioned. They have to be present to make a diagnosis. Second, antibodies, serology in these patients. Nowadays, a very important antibody test called anti-tissue transglutaminase (TTG), both IgA and IgG are important, and the level has to be at least more than 10 times. Second, another antibody called anti-endomysitis antibody, but is not so freely available, more expensive, and indicated in very few conditions. And sometimes anti-gliadin antibody, which is deamidated, which is very specific. But practically, we are mostly using the first antibody test called anti-TTG. Third, where available, we should go for HLA compatibility antigens, DQ2 and DQ8. If they are present, they add support to the diagnosis of celiac disease. And fourth is small gut biopsy, which is required in most cases. However, please make sure that patient must be getting a routine gluten-free diet, gluten-rich diet. Once you are making a diagnosis, you should be getting a diet which contains gluten. Now the management is just, the medical management include, you replace them with electrolytes, fluid, vitamins, minerals, calcium, vitamin D. But then you have to go for the dietary advice, which means completely eliminate gluten source, no wheat, no barley, जिसे हम कहते हैं जौ, or no rye, no oats. All of them are found to be toxic and irritant for the gut. Now, what to replace them? Because that may be a staple diet. So replace these grains with corn, potato, rice, soya, and other things. So these children should be strictly watched. They should not take gluten-containing diet at all. We all understand that wheat and the barley is our staple grain in Pakistan. Everybody loves to take it for centuries, including children. So diet is really introduced from 6 to 10 months onwards, and the patient becomes symptomatic. So these grains may not be present in the form of chapati only, but the grains. Gluten is added in many diets. And once you start managing these children, you must guide the parents about what food contain gluten and what is safe to be given. Chapati, bread, all bakery products, barley, all of them is gluten. It should be totally avoided. And please confirm diet, any diet that patient want to take, he may be having gluten mixing with it. So be careful. The gluten-free diet, we all know that. It includes rice, maize, gram seed, chana, lentil, dal, poultry, chicken, and eggs, meat of all types, oils, vegetables, and fruits. All of them are gluten-free and can be taken at liberty. Coming back to the same patient again that we had considered, the first question is, what further conditions needed consideration? Now, this patient had diarrhea starting from 6 months of age. Once breastfeeding was stopped, he was put on routine family diet, which included fresh milk and small amount of dalia, cereal, and then small amount of grains like wheat. Now that is how the thing started. The physician thought that due to milk, so he changed multiple milks. He gave lactose-free milk, soya milk, and so many things, goat milk. Again, all did not work. And again, he never took the history of the patient because there was another family member, one of his elder brother, also having the same complaint. The second thing, how to investigate the case. Although the stool examination was normal, the CBC revealed there is anemia and there were rickets. So the right thing would have been to go for serology like anti-TTG and biopsy. So what treatment can be offered based on diagnosis? Make a diagnosis of celiac disease. We should immediately stop using gluten in the diet completely, even to the extent that only amount of less than 50 grams per day is permissible. So complete elimination, lifelong elimination under supervision is the right treatment. We of course sometimes give this patient zinc and non-gluten containing diet, and then ultimately we follow them and we see the good response of treatment. The patient's diarrhea subside, abdomen becomes soft, and there is increasing in the height and weight, and the patient is more active, less irritable, playful, becomes pink, anemia is corrected, and make it a complete diagnosis. However, a repeat biopsy is not indicated. All what is required in follow-up is growth monitoring and antibody testing for decreasing in the level. That's all. We do not recommend second or third gut biopsy in a standard case. The treatment is very simple, is lifelong, and most of patients, if they comply with it, they remain healthy. Thank you very much. I hope you have been benefited from my talk. Thank you very much.